Hello, Brad. You are up first, sir.
Hey Bart, how's it going?
Pretty good, Brad. I know Brad has called into the show at least a few times before. Okay, so where's this one played out of?
This is a room in Dallas, Texas.
Okay, so in Dallas. This is a TCH Dallas, or?
No, it's not TCH.
Okay. And what's the size of the game?
Yeah, it's a 1-3, 70% match the stack with 1,000 cap.
70% match, but you can't buy in for more than 1,000.
Correct. So starting stack can only be 1,000, but as people start getting more
Oh, okay.
chips, you can match.
Okay, so in essence, it's like an uncapped game for the most part. I mean, that's how these things go. And I'm very familiar with these Texas 1-3 games. They kind of play like a 5-10 game, like a 5-10, 1,500 game, especially if they've been going on for quite some time. And that's why you don't see like 2-5 played like astronomically big in Texas. But I know some of the rooms are starting to actually put hard caps on the buy-ins. I think they might do that at the lodge a little bit. But this is a great setup here. 1-3, no rake, time collection. And how deep are you here for this one?
2,300.
There you go. 2,300 effective.
It was a long day.
Unbelievable. How long have you been playing like in this particular session for?
This session I was running really bad at first. I was down a lot. So I think I was probably there for close to 12 to 14 hours at this point.
Wow. Long session. All right, 2,300 effective. Okay.
Yeah. So just as like a setup or kind of like a little bit of background, I was talking to the guy on my right. He's in seat 4. I'm in seat 5. And we've played with each other once or twice. He's like a studied reg. He moved here from the East Coast. I was just explaining to him that I was like having a long session. And then I might have gotten out of line like once or twice, and I opened kind of speculative hands and I showed him, and he watched me bluff a couple of people. So I think I painted my image a little bit before this hand.
So he might think you're a little maniacal. Is that what you're saying?
Potentially, maybe just like a little laggy.
Okay.
So he opens in the cutoff to 20,
Okay.
and then I'm on the button with 6-5 of diamonds. And I turned to him and I asked him if he wants me to flat or if I should 3-bet him.
Okay.
And he said, I prefer if you 3-bet.
Okay.
So I make it 60, and it folds back to him and he calls.
So this is just a 2 blind setup, right? There's no straddle or anything?
So the straddle is optional. You could actually straddle up to $10 on the button, and you have ultimate last action. But this particular hand was not straddled.
Okay, so it's just a regular 1-3 setup, and it just doesn't surprise me. I mean, that's probably the typical open size, right? To 20. People aren't opening to like 9, right?
I mean, you have people who get jacks and they open to 45.
Right.
So it depends.
So you did kind of go kind of small here, though, for this stack depth. I mean, just 3x here. I tend to go a little bit larger, especially when deep in position. So we just have to keep that in mind. Because I mean, he is a late position opener, but he might have more hands than we think just because of the small 3-bet sizing. But he makes the call, and you're off heads up, and 120 here ish in the pot.
Yeah, so we have 120 in the pot, and I also will say that sometimes he's a little bit on the nitty side.
Okay.
So the flop comes out 6 of spades, 3 of clubs, 2 of diamonds.
6 of spades, 3 of clubs, 2 of diamonds. So you flop top pair. And you have a gut shot here to a 4, right? With 5-6 backdoor diamonds, okay?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So he checks.
Yep.
And then in a 3-bet pot, I mean, this is a board where, I'm blocking top set. So, based on the player profile, I don't think he has like 2s and 3s here. So as a continuation bet, what kind of sizing would you choose here?
Well, you mean you don't think he would open 2s and 3s, or?
Yeah, I don't think he opens 2s and 3s.
Well, I mean, I don't think you need to go huge here. It always too, like sometimes when people say, well, you're supposed to go really, really large on a low raggedy board. And while that's true, that usually is in a much tighter configuration. Like you guys have still a lot of hands here. I mean, you both might even have 4-5, although you say he might not with deuces and 3s, but you can just see it's cutoff versus button. So it's really quite wide. I would definitely bet here. And I think maybe you can go just like 1/3. If you start going larger, I mean, you want ace high hands to sort of call here. And you want some floats, I think, to get value from worse. And your hand obviously needs protection. So I don't know what a betting huge, like starting to go 2/3 of pot really accomplishes, unless you want to start like turning your hand into a bluff in a certain situation where you get, disconnected overcards. But I don't know, I think with your hand properties, I don't know if you necessarily need to do that.
And this is kind of where I was torn. I went a little bit bigger because I think he's very capable of check raising. And if I take a smaller size, I thought I wouldn't be able to tell if I was getting check raised because he has value or if I was getting check raised because I went for a smaller sizing.
Well, I know that can be tricky sometimes, but you don't necessarily want to approach it that way just because you're not going to get check raised. And especially with this one, because you have an easy continue, right? I mean, and the way that I would approach that is that if you were to bet 40 and he check raised you, then you're just going to play the rest of the hand in position, really. And then, in the rally, if you get a situation where, some like disconnected overcards come and he's still betting really, really large, you have to ask yourself, what is this guy trying to, really represent here? But I just think that you want to get some value. But it sounds to me like you went larger. How much did you go?
I bet 80 into 120.
Okay. I mean, the pot is still relatively small here, too. We talk about absolute pot size as a small stakes exploit. Like, I mean, the pot's $120, right? So it's just one of these things where it's not a gigantic bet when the pot starts getting super, super large. So, okay, you go 80.
Yes. And then he check raises me to 180.
Well, so, yeah. I mean, so cut off to 180. And I think, the sizing here matters because I think what you're going to say is that because you went 80, right, the tendency for him to just check raise as a bluff is lessened as opposed to if you bet like 30, right, and you went to like 130 trying to make a play at it. The thing is that I'm not exactly sure what this is representing here if he does this with like a hand like 7s, 8s, but I mean, your hand and your hand properties, even if you're behind now, you obviously have pot odds to continue. I mean, I think this is a very easy call. One of the things I didn't think about here, just looking at this, is bet 3-betting the flop to get something that is better to fold. My only thing about, I'm just throwing this out there at you, is I don't know if small overpairs fold if you do bet 3-bet the flop here. And, he could still have some bluffs, although your hand is very, very vulnerable. I don't know if you considered possibly doing that. It starts to get a little bit in between.
Yeah, it definitely crossed my mind. I was tanking a little bit with the check raise, trying to I was definitely at least calling, but I almost contemplated 3-betting the flop.
Yeah.
Then I was trying to figure out what range he would have to start check raising me with. So I think I'm ahead of some potential like 2 overs that thinks I'm kind of full of it.
Mm-hmm.
That thinks he can get me to fold ace high, or maybe he did have like a smaller pocket pair. I block the nuts and I block top set. So again, like I said before, I don't think he had 2s and 3s. So I feel like his range might contain some of that, but I think it's still weighted to more overs or naked overs.
Do you think that you would would you be bet 3-betting the flop here with like queens, kings, aces, something like that?
Probably not. I think having a 6 here allows me to 3-bet the flop a little bit more because I have like a set blocker, blocking some like more of his value than I would if I had like aces, kings, or queens here.
So you make the call, I assume?
Yeah, so I make the call.
All right, so 360 goes in here on the flop, and the pot's like right around 480. Okay.
Yes. And then the turn is the 9 of hearts.
Okay, so I mean that's that's really a brick. Doesn't really have any connection really with the board. I mean, there would never be any type of 2 pair that's represented here with the 9. The only thing would be like if he, was check raising with pocket 9s. Of course, that's less likely now that a 9 appears. Okay.
Right. And then he checks.
So villain checks. So cutoff checks. So I think that your hand here is obviously fairly vulnerable. I mean, if he just has 2 overcards, right, he would just have 6 outs. But my first inclination here would be to possibly just make another kind of protectionish type of bet here of kind of like 1/3-ish, something like that. So 25 to 30%. So maybe like 140 to 150. And then if he calls, maybe take a showdown. Unless you want to start putting I mean, obviously there's three options, right? You could bet small, you could bet large, which starts to kind of put your hand like you're turning it into a bluff, or you could check back and then call like a lot of rivers, but it's a little bit strange. So I guess sometimes if you called the check raise here and you check back turn, you can sometimes make your hand look like it's like ace king. Because his small check raise, like if you had ace king with a backdoor or something like that, I mean, his small check raise, if you were to bet with a hand like ace king and you made it 180, especially if you had a backdoor, I mean, I think you're supposed to continue. So you might play that as a check behind, but I still kind of like the smallish like turn sizing here if I were you in position.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was curious about. I think the part of this hand that I was the most curious about was the turn. If we had queens plus here, would you take a bigger sizing for value as an exploit, or would you still bet about like 1/3 for just to kind of get worse to continue?
That's an interesting question. So that was just trying to get like hands like tens, jacks, some hands that might not have four bet. I think I would kind of tend to take the same type of sizing because it just doesn't seem like he's all that strong.
Because I contemplated all three options. I contemplated checking and taking showdown value and bluff catching some rivers. And then I also contemplated starting to turn my hand into a bluff if he did
Right.
have a hand like sevens or eights or even tens or jacks here.
Right. Like I said, you have all three options available, right? Bet small, turn your hand into a bluff, bet large, or check back.
Sure. Yeah.
All have some viable reasons behind them.
Okay. Yeah. So that's what I was most torn on. And I wound up going 150.
Okay. So you did take that sizing.
Yes.
Okay.
And he calls.
So here bet's 150 and cutoff calls. So now the pot's 780. It's interesting because, so what are you ahead of here? Could it be a hand like fives, fours? I don't know if it goes down so far as like 3, 4. If you had like a 6 in it, you've got like the worst kicker. So if you had like ace 6, something like that, and obviously he can continue to have like sevens, eights, and he's just kind of slowing down. Depending on what the river is, though, I still very well might just kind of check behind because your hand is so in between. I find some hands that you beat here. So it'll be interesting to see. So the pot's 780 now, okay?
The river's the 6 of hearts.
Oh, okay. It's a good card for you.
Yep. And then he checks.
So cutoff checks again.
Yeah.
Well, now, whether you want to call this exploitable or not, I actually probably would go for somewhat of a larger sizing, not something like pot, because again, absolute bet sizing is getting pretty big, but I think this is one where it might look full of it, meaning that your opponent might think if you go like 400 or 500 here that you're very sort of, you're either bluffing with something or you have a 6. It's amazing when top pair pairs after getting check raised on the flop, how often you will get called down because your opponent thinks that you are somewhat polar here. So I might go 450 to 500. I mean, I know you're going to value bet, Brad. I guess the question is just the sizing, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I actually wanted to know if we did wind up checking back turn and hitting this 6, can we take a larger sizing closer to pot?
I do. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, I would. And again, another function of the pot actually being absolutely a little bit smaller, right? Because if you check back turn, the pot's 480, and I would definitely go close to pot. But here, maybe 2/3, because I mean, you've represented a fairly strong line where if he's got like sevens or eights, you called the check raise, bet the turn. And then now you bet the river, and obviously I don't know what the skill level of your opponent is, but if I was in your opponent's spot, I would be like, wow, this guy, like, if he was calling with like a hand like ace, king, ace, queen, I don't know how often he's going to take this line of betting turn and then betting river when a 6 comes at the end.
Right. And the thing is, he saw me get out of line like a couple of times, and he saw my holdings when I was getting out of line. So he knows I'm very capable of putting in, money into a pot with nothing at this point.
T Corrupta in the live chat says you're still betting this river with queen plus, right? I think I misread that. I was going to say, like, I was thinking about what your opponent bets here. People saying, oh, he's going to show up with a 6. I mean, I don't think he's taking this line here with the 6. He's going to bet the river. And then if he has really good overpairs like jacks and queens, he's going to bet the river here too. So, all right, it gets checked to you.
It gets checked to me, and then I went into the tank for a little bit, and I was I really wanted to go like 800 here. And then I was deciding that maybe he probably wouldn't call 800.
Hmm.
So I was like, what's the biggest I could go that he would call? And I thought I could go 550.
Okay. So here goes 550. I personally just think,
Well,
yeah.
so I meant to go 5.
Okay. You meant to go 550.
And I grabbed too many black chips and I went 650.
Oh, so a little live misclick.
Yeah.
Okay. So here goes 650. Okay.
Yeah. He goes into the tank for a long time. And then he starts talking out loud, asks me if he could see a card, and then tells me how much he watched me bluff tonight, and that he knows I'm capable and that he thinks I'm full of it. And then he winds up mucking and just folding.
So he mucks. Did you find out what he had?
Yeah, he said he had tens.
Like right afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, he asked to see a card, and then after he folded, I showed him the 5 of diamonds. He's like, I knew I should have called. It was like ace 5 of diamonds. And I was like, yeah. But then I told him.
So just a couple of things to wrap this call up. So like I said, I personally would have gone 450 to 500. The interesting other little part of this is funny as we write this out is on the turn when you get called. I'm going to throw this out as a little wrinkle looking back at this hand. I kind of felt a little antsy when you got called on the turn in the sense that maybe even when you get called for 150, your hand is not good a lot of the time, which makes me think maybe you should either start turning your hand into a bluff or a larger sizing or possibly checking it back. I mean, I'm trying to think of how often your hand here is good when you go 150 on the turn. And then, it could also maybe suggest even a smaller protection bet of like 100 to 125 or something like that. It's just a little something that was subtle. I don't know if you thought, did you ever get that feeling like, maybe my hand's not good when I got called on turn?
I thought from the flop I was already no good, but I was just not folding flop. And then I thought there were a lot of good overcards for me to continue barreling on, like even like queen plus potentially.
So you thought you were turning your hand into a bluff on the turn then with the 150?
Yeah, I was ready to polarize on the river and go large on like a total brick.
I might have, if you were doing that, I might have liked to have taken a larger sizing on turn then.
Right.
Now maybe something like 300, something like that, because it's just going to lead to a larger river spot. I mean, you can obviously bet 150 and then go like overpot at the end, but I might have gone a little bit larger than on the turn. But I was actually thinking 150 was more of a protection type bet, but it's very close.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to get your opinion on this. I like each street I was kind of faced with a bunch of options. I wasn't sure which one was the best one to take.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for the call, Brad. I appreciate it.